You're sitting there on your deathbed. You're surrounded by your loved ones. Your life is flashing before your eyes. You're reminded of that funny TikTok you watched back in 18. How stacked your FIFA squad was in 2021. How good Bryan Cranston was in Season 2, Episode 4 of Breaking Bad. That has never happened, and that will never happen. We've already forgotten half the things that we consumed last week, and in this consumer culture where we have an insatiable appetite for more and more entertainment, we're living more and more forgettable lives. This video, I'm going to discuss why most of us are going to live forgettable lives and my plan to live a memorable life. The number one reason why I think that most people are going to live forgettable lives is simply the fact that we're putting so much time and attention into things that don't matter, things that we're going to forget. No one is looking back on their life thinking about all of the video games they played and thinking about watching that TV show they loved or scrolling and watching that amazing TikTok, probably except for looking back in regret. These low level, these passive activities, you're not remembering these. You're not remembering any of these activities. What are you remembering? You're probably going to remember the time you spent with loved ones, that big adventure you did, the places that you've lived, the things that you've accomplished, those marathons that you've run, the languages that you've learned, the businesses that you've built. You're going to remember these things, the things that were somewhat challenging, the things that made you a better person, the things that you loved doing, people you loved being around. These are the things that you're going to actually remember. You're not going to remember sitting on your ass watching TV. You're not going to remember playing the video games or scrolling the social media. These are not the things that you're going to remember. And if you allocate nearly all of your free time, nearly all of your energy to these things you're going to forget, you're going to live a forgettable life. No one remembers that person in the crowd. And right now, so many of us are just in the crowd. We're just sitting there. We're just consuming all day. All we do is consume. We live our lives as the person in the crowd. And you're not going to really remember these times that you're spending being passive, just sitting back and observing. These are not the things that you're going to remember about yourself, about your life. So what is the cure? What is the cure to a boring, to a forgettable life? This is what I've really been thinking about recently. How do I make my life as interesting as possible? How do I make my life a life worth living? I don't want to live a cookie cutter life that everyone else lives. I want there to be something fun, something unique, something interesting about my life. And I think this comes from creating lore. People talk about the dad lore, about creating stories, little pockets of your past that contribute, that when put together in a collage, create you as a person. How can we create the best story possible? The first one here, doing cool, interesting things. I reckon it's a pretty important and overlooked one because a lot of people think, okay, I have to focus on my business or my work and I have to focus on getting in shape. And those are my two things that I just have to tunnel vision hustle on that. What happens is you get caught up in just this routine, this monotonous routine, and the time does fly by and you've kind of done two things for a few years. And it's like, good, you're probably progressing in some way, but you're missing out on that cool factor, that interesting factor of having different aspects to your life. So, for example, it could be, I'm going to go live in 4 different countries this year or next year, or I'm going to learn a few languages, or I'm just going to do things that are slightly strange. So, for example, I just went on a holiday. It was me and my brother. We traveled to 4 different continents in 4 weeks. And one of the things we did was we did a massive 2-day hike to the summit of the Atlas Mountains, which is the highest mountain in North Africa. We didn't really know what we were getting ourselves into. We just kind of said, oh, it's a 2-day hike, rocked up in shorts and t-shirt, and basically did the whole hike incredibly poorly prepared. And often these are things that at the time you think, oh, this is a bit of a nightmare. You know, I'm hiking for 20 hours in Morocco with 750 milliliters of water and no hiking equipment, right? It might seem like a challenging thing at the time, but you look back on it and it's this great story, this great thing that you've done. And I want this law to get even better. Next year, I'm going to spend 8 months living in different countries in South America, okay? Basically doing all of the things I would do on a day-to-day, but just doing it on the other side of the world. A completely different lifestyle, completely different culture. Creating these little moments, and you might only have to have a few of these a year, but creating these moments you can look back on and go, wow, that was pretty awesome. That was a pretty crazy thing that I did. Second thing is challenging activities, right? Doing anything that is tough, that is difficult, that takes a fair bit of time, and you get to the end of it and you achieve something, that is an incredible feeling. And it's something that you're going to look back on throughout time. That's probably going to age pretty well. Honestly, most of these challenging things, most of these difficult things, you look back on with fonder memories than you did when you were actually doing them. These things age really well with time. Things like scrolling, things like, immediate cheap dopamine, online entertainment, these are things that feel great in the moment, and you look back on and think, what the hell am I doing? Right? Challenging activities, the opposite happens. Okay. So for me, for example, some challenging activities I'm trying to do right now is particularly trying to run a marathon a month. Now, I've ran 2 marathons for the last 2 months, and they've been really, really hard. They've been brutally painful. Both marathons I ended up essentially running for 20 kilometers with full body cramps, like super painful, horrendous. I'm looking back on that. The last marathon I did was last Tuesday. I look back on that with great fondness. I'm thinking about that as a little core memory, a little part of my life, a thing that I did because it was a challenging thing I was doing, okay? Another challenging thing I'm going to do, I'm learning Spanish at the moment. I'm trying to become fluent in Spanish, okay? That is a challenging thing, big payoff. I'm going to look back on that with very, very fond memories. I'm going to look back on that and it's going to create a memorable moment of achievement, of becoming fluent, of running those marathons. They're challenging things that might seem difficult. They might kind of suck sometimes at the time, but you're going to look back on them and they're going to be super memorable. They're going to actually be things that you can look back on in your life and say, wow, I achieved that. I accomplished that, rather than I consumed that. The third thing is having big goals. That is a super important one, because if you look back on the course of your life, if you've set yourself big goals and you're actually moving towards them, most likely you're going to accomplish them, right? At least most of them you're going to accomplish, which means that you'll have achieved big things in your life. If you don't set yourself ambitious goals, if you kind of just, you're going to meander casually through life, you're kind of going to float through it, be very reactive. You don't have big goals, you're not going to accomplish anything big. But if you had big goals you've set, and yeah, sure, it took you a few years, but a few years in the grand scheme of your life, you're probably barely going to notice it, but you have that big achievement at the end of it, okay? So for me, I want to learn Spanish. I'm probably not going to stop there. I maybe want to learn a few more languages after that. So I can say, cool, I have an ambitious goal of learning 4 languages, right? That's an ambitious goal. That takes a bit of effort, but accomplishing that, maybe that takes me 3 years. Now I have 4 languages under my belt. Running a marathon a month, okay? Another ambitious goal. It'll be difficult. It'll be challenging. 10 years time, you're coming out of that with 100 marathons under your belt, right? That's pretty cool lore. That's a pretty cool story that you've created for yourself. That's a pretty cool life that you've lived. Rather than, I spent the last 20 years going to my job and consuming online entertainment. I played a lot of video games. I watched a lot of TV shows. I scrolled a lot of social media. That was kind of it. Super forgettable. If you're like, yeah, well, I had this big goal of running a marathon a month and I actually did it for like 5 years, or, I learned a few languages. I built that business. I set myself difficult goals, and yeah, I struggled. Yeah, I failed a lot, but I eventually got there. Because the goal's high, when you look at it over a long enough time frame, you can accomplish most goals over a long enough time horizon. So at the end of the day, the more ambitious the goal, the bigger the achievement that you'll have throughout your life. For me, it all comes down to, how can I create the best story? How can I create the best story for my life? By doing interesting things, doing challenging things, setting myself big, ambitious goals that I'll eventually achieve. Doing all these things is going to create an interesting, a fun story, rather than being that person that doesn't have big goals. They're just kind of reactionary. They sit there and they consume, they get through their life and they look back on it and think, well, what do I have to show for it? I mean, I consumed quite a bit of social media. I mean, yeah, I went out on the weekend a few times, had some big nights, and yeah, that was kind of it. That was kind of my life. I would rather look back and think, whoa, I have a serious story here. I have a lot of cool things I did. I had a lot of big goals that I accomplished, a lot of difficult things that I did throughout my life. That sounds like a memorable life, a life worth living. Where does this all start? Where is the first step that we can be taking right now to live that life worth living a memorable life? I think all of this stems from removing the online entertainment. When you remove the online entertainment, when you have it out of your life completely, you have to start filling that void with other activities. The online entertainment is going to be the most destructive, the lowest ROI activities that you can possibly be doing. So all you're doing is filling it with more meaningful activities, with more challenging things, with probably steps that are going to take you towards ambitious goals. It's going to be filled with things that are going to give you a more interesting, a more memorable life. Remember, no one remembers that person sitting in the crowd. Don't let that be you. Don't be that person that's just sitting there consuming all day, just being passive, living a forgettable life. Guys, if you want to start living a memorable life, if you want to take that first step, if you're going to try and get off online entertainment, then you can do it by yourself. You're going to struggle. It's going to be tough. Or I can show you exactly how I removed all online entertainment from my life completely without requiring willpower. If you're interested in that, I'll leave a link in the description below for you to check out. That's the end of the video. If you like the video, then that's what the like button's for. Subscribe to the channel. There's probably a video somewhere around here that you might be interested in. So I'll see you in one of those.